I hope you're doing well. We know the world is going through a lot right now. I do want to start on the war. Per your own government, around 80% of New Zealand's refined oil flows in its unrefined state through the Strait of Hormuz. How radically has that affected your economy at this moment in time?
Well, look, it's a very significant challenge for our economy, which has been recovering strongly after a challenged period. We've seen a doubling in the price of diesel, one of the refined fuels that we rely on significantly, and about a 35% increase in the price of petrol. So consumers are already feeling that price pressure at the pump, and we expect it will have an inflationary impulse throughout the economy, with a downside for the growth potential of the economy this year. We are also having to anticipate some worst-case scenarios in which there could be genuine supply disruption of the fuel that we import into New Zealand. So we're preparing for those worst-case scenarios through options to potentially build up our own national reserves of fuel, and also to have a fuel response plan in which we may need to call for voluntary demand restraint in the future. So it's a very significant set of circumstances for us to be navigating our way through.
Yeah, you're certainly not the only country that's affected by this, but I mean, you do put in stark relief just the fact that, you know, with the strait closed, how challenging it can be for an entire economy. You mentioned stockpiles. You do have stockpiles in petrol, diesel, jet fuel. We know that. How are the stockpiles faring right now? Are they close to exhaustion? What's the status of them?
Yeah, look, our stockpiles are in very good shape. We have minimum stock holding obligations for every fuel importing company who imports fuel into New Zealand, and we are diversified across a range of fuel importing companies, including multinationals. And so those reserves are in great shape. There's no risk of them going below the obligation. We have around between 50 and 60 days of each of the respective fuel types, either in the country or safely in tankers on the water on its way to New Zealand. We monitor those fuel supplies closely. We're doing twice weekly reporting to New Zealanders about those fuel levels, and we've had no disruption so far to supply. However, we are being proactive, and we're anticipating scenarios in the future in which fuel importing companies who rely on those refineries in Singapore and South Korea that are experiencing less crude stock than usual may not be able to fulfill all of their usual orders. Now, were that to occur, we'd expect in the first instance fuel importing companies would access fuel elsewhere on the spot market or from refineries elsewhere. But even so, there could be disruption or delay. And so as an economy, we need to prepare for that potentiality.
Minister Willis, one of the things that we've been talking about a lot here at Bloomberg is kind of longer term, the impact, whether it's on the energy markets or raw materials, crucial minerals. It does look like every nation is looking to make itself secure because of national security concerns to protect their economy. Let's just start with oil, long-term strategies, if at all, to lessen the dependency. It sounds like you guys are on foreign oil or on the United States, which must be, I think it's safe to say, the U.S. is a turbulent partner at this moment.
Well, look, New Zealand is somewhat ahead of some countries in that our electricity system is largely independent of oil. We have a largely renewable electricity generation in New Zealand from hydro, solar and wind. But as I've outlined, we depend on fuel for our transportation system in particular. And so we are taking steps as a country to build our own resilience. We've seen a doubling in the registration of electric vehicles this year off the back of these heightened prices. And we do expect as a government to continue to take steps such as rolling out an electric vehicle charging network to support that transition. But ultimately, it is the case that when conflicts like that that's playing out in the Middle East occur and they disrupt global supply chains and the global economy, New Zealand is not immune from the impacts. We are also unable to influence the decision-making of the major actors in this conflict, but the economic ramifications are significant for us, even though we are so many miles away from the conflict itself.
I want to dig into those.
Global economic impact to inflation and growth is massive.
So let's go there, Minister Willis, and to what exactly you're penciling out in a worst-case scenario here. Moments ago, you did say that this is inflationary, and it could be inflationary, and it could also lead to lower growth for the economy this year. What are you penciling out here? What are your predictions?
Well, like every forecaster in the world right now, including the IMF, who put their forecasts out yesterday, there is such a broad range of scenarios that could still play out, depending on the trajectory of the conflict and how long it takes for supply chains to resume to normal. Our Reserve Bank have published their views on where inflation could go, and they're forecasting that in the third quarter of the year that inflation could hit 4.2% in New Zealand, which is outside our target band. We target inflation to remain between 1% and 3%. And they're forecasting that potential growth will be lower than would have otherwise been the case. We were looking at annualised growth of about 3% this year. It's very unlikely we will hit those levels now. But as to how bad the worst case scenario could be, how high inflation could go, how low growth could go, it all depends on how quickly the conflict ends. So we're calling for the ceasefire to be enduring, for negotiations to resume, for de-escalation to be chosen at every point, because the sooner that happens, the better our economic prospects are for the year ahead.
Well, let's go there. How do you feel like what information, whether it's being there in D.C., talking to other leaders, I don't know if you're planning to have any meetings with the administration. Have you met with anybody in the administration while you're there? And whether you feel like we're getting anything definitive about when this war ends?
I will in the coming days meet with members of the President's economic team and get the views of the administration that way. So far I've met with a number of finance ministers from around the world, and I'd say a theme that's coming through is uncertainty, a lack of clarity about what the next steps will be in the Middle East, and therefore what it is that we as nations need to be prepared for. There's a common theme that we all wish to see that Strait of Hormuz reopened fully as soon as possible so that that supply chain keeps functioning well. And a shared concern across nations that when the global oil market is disrupted in this way, it has inflationary impacts for our consumers, growth impacts for our countries, and frankly, has made the whole world poorer than it would otherwise be. So a shared concern.
You mentioned the Strait of Hormuz, and that's where I want to go back to right now, because all the challenges when it comes to energy are emanating from there and from the region. New Zealand, one of 35 countries led by the UK in seeking to reopen the strait. The US not included in that group. They're in their own negotiations. We're in our own negotiations. Is there progress in this group of 35?
Well, of course, we're continuing to seek as a group of 35 diplomatic and political solutions to ensure that the strait can reopen and remain open. We're conscious, though, that until there is an enduring ceasefire in which hostilities has ceased, it will be very challenging to keep that strait open. So there's an order of events here. I think it's for the main actors in this conflict, for Iran, for the United States, for Israel, to come to an enduring ceasefire, at which point our other nations can support efforts to keep maritime passage going and support the Strait of Hormuz once again being a critical channel for global supply.
Hey, one thing we've got to ask you, we were just talking about with our Michael McKee about, first of all, the state of global monetary flows, something that we like to watch a lot. President Trump here continues to attack Fed Chair Jay Powell. If there's turbulence in the U.S. financial system, what's the net impact on New Zealand and Oceania?
Well, look, I would hesitate to comment on the domestic affairs of the United States.
But it's not great, right? Because everybody,
bank.
Yeah, but it's not great because everybody watches the U.S. central bank. But go ahead, please.
Yeah, certainly for New Zealand, we have gained considerably from the independence of our Reserve Bank. We very strongly support that independence in monetary policy. We believe that independent monetary policy has led to stable inflation and effective inflation targeting. And in the case of New Zealand, we have been able to have largely stable inflation as well as interest rate trajectories that have been predictable with good information for markets. So we stand strongly on the side of independence in central banks, and certainly that's been the case for our Reserve Bank in New Zealand.
Okay, we got one more question because both of us are just sitting here dying to go to New Zealand.
I want to go diving
I feel
there.
like
I want to
we could do an exchange with
Yes.
you. You've been here
Please
twice
come.
now. Yeah.
You're very, very welcome.
Yeah, Carol wants to do some diving and some sailing there. I have some friends whose parents just got back from a month there, and they absolutely loved it, Minister. I'm just wondering about tourism, though, in an age of higher energy prices and whether the higher energy costs are crimping tourism and what that outlook looks like for the year, because this is so crucial to the country's economy.
Yeah, look, tourism's a very important industry for us, and of course we are braced for the potential impact of higher jet fuel prices impacting travel to New Zealand. So far, we're not seeing strong evidence of that. It seems there's a very resilient travel market, actually particularly out of North America, where people are continuing to choose New Zealand as their next destination. And I think actually we've got something particular to offer in a world that is more unstable than it has been, that we are very safe, we are very peaceful, we are very predictable as a country. So those choosing a destination in the future can pick New Zealand on their itinerary and know our airports will still be functioning, there'll be no missiles flying over your head, and we'll have a very beautiful offering for you as well, with very friendly people, a gorgeous environment and a lot to do. So we'll be continuing to market New Zealand as a wonderful premium destination.